I'm Spencer Banks, 42, a quiet man who learned long ago that actions speak louder than words. For 20 years, I served my country with honor, earning medals I never talked about and scars I never showed. When I married Sarah, her family saw only a simple mechanic who worked with his hands, not the decorated veteran who'd served 3 tours overseas. At last Sunday's family barbecue, my son-in-law Marcus decided to make me the punchline of his joke. Standing before everyone, he picked up my Purple Heart from the mantle and announced, "Look at these fake medals Spencer bought online to impress people." The room erupted in laughter as my own family mocked 20 years of sacrifice. But Marcus had no idea what he'd just set in motion. You see, some truths have a way of surfacing when you least expect them, and sometimes, the phone calls that change everything come from the Pentagon itself. The laughter still echoed in my ears, hours after the last guest had left. I sat in my workshop behind the house, staring at the framed wedding photo on my workbench, radiant in white, surrounded by her family who had smiled so warmly that day. Her father had shaken my hand firmly, welcoming me to the family with what seemed like genuine warmth. Her mother had even cried a little, saying how happy she was that Sarah had found such a solid, dependable man. That was 12 years ago, before they realized I wasn't climbing any corporate ladders. Before they understood I preferred working with my hands to networking at country clubs. Before they decided I wasn't good enough for their daughter. Sarah found me there as darkness fell, her face a mixture of embarrassment and confusion. "Spencer, I'm so sorry about Marcus. He'd been drinking, and you know how he gets when he what?" I interrupted gently, not looking up from the photo. "When he decides to humiliate your husband in front of your entire family." She sat down on the old milk crate I kept beside my workbench, her designer dress looking out of place among my tools. "He didn't mean it maliciously. He just, He doesn't understand why you never talk about your service. He thinks if someone really served, they'd be proud to share stories." I finally looked at her, this woman I loved, who still didn't understand that some stories were too heavy to share at barbecues. "And what do you think, Sarah?" She was quiet for a long moment, fidgeting with her wedding ring. "I think there's a lot about you I don't know. And maybe that's my fault for never asking the right questions." The wedding photos seemed to mock us both, the people who thought they knew each other well enough to promise forever, only to discover 12 years later that forever was built on assumptions and carefully maintained silences. "Marcus has been telling people for months that you probably bought those medals online," she admitted quietly. "He said real veterans don't keep their medals on display like trophies. They don't need to prove anything to anyone." I almost laughed at the irony. Marcus, who had never served a day in his life, lecturing others about how real veterans behaved. Marcus, who drove his BMW with a Support Our Troops magnet while mocking an actual veteran in his own family. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him to mind his own business." She paused. "But Spencer, I've wondered too. You never talk about it. Ever. Even when that documentary about Afghanistan came on last month, you just left the room." I stood up and walked to the small window overlooking our backyard. The house was dark now, peaceful. Tomorrow I'd go back to the auto shop, work on engines, come home to a quiet dinner. It was a simple life. And I'd worked hard to build it after returning from a world where simplicity was a luxury few could afford. "Some things are better left undisturbed," I said finally. "But not talking about it is what gave Marcus ammunition." She pressed. "If people knew what you actually did, what you actually went through, then what?" I turned to face her. "Then your family would respect me. Then Marcus would shake my hand and apologize. Sarah, I didn't serve my country, so your relatives would think better of me at barbecues." She looked stung, and I immediately regretted the edge in my voice. This wasn't her fault. She'd married a man who kept his past locked away, and she'd spent 12 years trying to fit the pieces together from the shadows he cast. "I'm going to bed," she said quietly, standing up. At the workshop door, she paused. "For what it's worth, I've never doubted that you served. I just wish I understood why it has to be such a secret." After she left, I sat back down and picked up the wedding photo again. In it, I looked so young, so hopeful. I'd thought civilian life would be straightforward: find a good woman, build a simple life, leave the past where it belonged. I'd underestimated how the past had a way of following you, especially when you tried so hard to outrun it. I opened the drawer of my workbench and pulled out a small wooden box I hadn't touched in months. Inside, beneath a layer of tissue paper, lay a piece of paper I'd carried in my wallet for 20 years, until it became too worn to fold anymore. My discharge papers, with commendations I'd never spoken aloud. Tomorrow, I decided, would be different. Some silences were meant to be broken, and some truths deserved to see daylight. Marcus had picked the wrong veteran to humiliate, and it was time he learned that lesson properly. The memory came back to me as I held those discharge papers, clear as if it had happened yesterday instead of 15 years ago. Afghanistan, 2010. The deployment orders had arrived on a Tuesday, my third tour, and what I'd privately hoped would be my last. I was 27 then, a staff sergeant with 2 previous deployments under my belt, young enough to still believe I was invincible, old enough to know better. Our unit was tasked with training Afghan National Army forces in Helmand Province, one of the most dangerous regions in the country. The incident that earned me the Purple Heart happened on day 243 of what was supposed to be a 365-day deployment. We were returning from a routine patrol with our Afghan counterparts when our convoy hit an IED improvised explosive device. The blast flipped our Humvee like a toy, and in the chaos that followed, I found myself pinned under twisted metal with shrapnel in my leg and shoulder. But it wasn't my injuries that haunted me. It was what came next. Private Rodriguez, barely 19 and on his first deployment, was trapped in the overturned vehicle as it began to smoke. The kid was screaming, and I could smell fuel everywhere. My leg was useless, but I managed to crawl back to the wreckage and pull him out just before the engine caught fire. The explosion threw us both clear, adding burns to my collection of wounds. But Rodriguez lived. The Purple Heart was for my injuries. The Bronze Star with Valor was for saving Rodriguez's life. But I'd never told anyone about Rodriguez, about the nightmares where I didn't reach him in time, about the letters his mother still sent me every Christmas, thanking me for bringing her son home. Those were the stories I couldn't tell at barbecue. How do you explain to someone who's never been in combat that heroism often feels like failure? That every medal represents not just what you did, but what you couldn't do for others who didn't make it home. I'd served 20 years total, 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, and various other deployments that blurred together in my memory. When I finally retired, I was a master sergeant with commendations I'd earned by doing my job in places most people couldn't find on a map. I'd buried friends, saved lives, and carried secrets that would never make it into polite conversation. Coming home to civilian life had been its own kind of combat. The transition classes they gave us talked about finding purpose, translating military skills to civilian careers, reconnecting with family. They didn't mention how loud silence could be when you were used to the constant hum of generators and distant gunfire. They didn't explain how strange it felt to worry about trivial things, like traffic jams when you'd spent years worrying about roadside bombs. I'd chosen automotive work because engines made sense. They had problems with clear solutions. Fix what's broken, replace what's worn out, maintain what's working. There was honest satisfaction in taking something that didn't run and making it per-like. Sarah had been working as a nurse at the VA hospital when we met. She understood something about service members, about the weight they carried. Or at least, I thought she did. She'd seen enough wounded veterans to recognize the signs of someone carrying invisible scars. What I hadn't anticipated was how her family would view my choice to work with my hands instead of leveraging my military experience into some corporate position. Her father, Richard, was a successful investment banker who'd built his wealth through connections and calculated risks. He'd never served, had gotten a college deferment during Vietnam, and built his empire while others fought overseas. To him, my decision to be a mechanic represented a lack of ambition, a waste of potential. Marcus, who'd married Sarah's sister, Jennifer, 2 years after our wedding, was cut from the same cloth. He worked in Richard's firm, drove expensive cars, and talked endlessly about his latest deals and acquisitions. He'd never worn a uniform, never taken an oath to defend anything beyond his own interests. But somehow, in the twisted logic of family dynamics, his opinions carried more weight than my 20 years of service. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 2 decades defending the freedom of people like Marcus to live comfortable lives, to mock what they didn't understand, to prosper in safety while others stood guard in dangerous places. And now one of those people was questioning whether I'd actually done what I'd done. I folded the discharge papers carefully and put them back in the box. Tomorrow, I'd make a phone call I'd been avoiding for 5 years, not because I was afraid, but because I'd hoped I'd never need to. Colonel James Mitchell, my former commanding officer, had made it clear when I retired that the door was always open if I needed anything. He'd built a career in the Pentagon after his field service ended, and he'd kept track of his former soldiers with the dedication of a shepherd watching his flock. I'd never called in that favor because I believed civilian life would be different. I'd thought respect was something you earn through daily actions, through integrity and hard work, and treating people decently. I'd been naive enough to think my service record would speak for itself if it ever needed to. Marcus had changed the rules of engagement. He'd made this public, turned my private service into a public spectacle for his own amusement. He'd laughed at medals that represented blood, sacrifice, and the trust of soldiers who'd depended on me to bring them home alive. Some lines, once crossed, demanded a response, and some responses came with the full weight of the United States military behind them. The next morning, I sat at our kitchen table with a cup of coffee and Sarah's inheritance documents spread before me, papers I'd found years ago and never really examined closely. The Whitmore family fortune was older and deeper than I'd realized. When I married into it, Sarah's great-grandfather had built the foundation through steel manufacturing during World War II, profiting handsomely from defense contracts while other men's sons died on foreign beaches. Her grandfather had diversified into real estate and banking, always staying safely behind the lines of actual risk. Her father Richard had inherited an empire built on other people's sacrifices, and he'd grown it through calculated financial maneuvers that never required him to put anything more valuable than money on the line. The family trust documents told a story of wealth protected through generations, passed down to children who'd never known want or genuine hardship. Sarah had grown up in a world where problems were solved with money, where social standing mattered more than character, where the right connections could open any door. I'd been an anomaly from the beginning, a man who'd earned his position through merit rather than inheritance, who chose honest work over inherited wealth, who carried scars from service rather than privilege. They'd tolerated me initially because Sarah loved me, but tolerance wasn't the same as acceptance. Marcus fit their world perfectly. He'd grown up 3 towns over in similar wealth, had attended the right schools, married into the family with Richard's enthusiastic approval. He spoke their language of investments and acquisitions, shared their political views, played golf at their country club. When he joined Richard's investment firm 2 years after marrying Jennifer, it felt like a natural progression rather than nepotism. The family had always made their preferences clear through small gestures and casual comments. At family gatherings, conversation flowed around Marcus's latest business successes, while my work fixing engines was politely ignored. When they discussed vacation plans to European destinations, they'd express surprise that Sarah and I preferred camping trips and modest getaways. When Marcus bought his 3rd luxury car, Richard praised his success and ambition, while my decision to drive a practical 10-year-old truck was met with thinly veiled disapproval. Sarah had tried to bridge the gap over the years, defending my choices while simultaneously apologizing for my failure to meet their expectations. She'd suggested I consider using my military experience to transition into corporate security or defense contracting, fields that would pay better and carry more prestige in her family's eyes. When I'd declined, explaining that I was content with honest work that let me sleep peacefully at night, she'd looked disappointed but had stopped pushing. The systematic undermining had been subtle but persistent. Comments about my lack of ambition, delivered with concerned smiles. Observations about how different our lives could be if I'd apply myself to more lucrative opportunities. Questions about whether Sarah was fulfilled in our modest lifestyle, asked when they thought I wasn't listening. Marcus had been the worst of them, perhaps because his own position in the family was secured through marriage rather than birth. He seemed to need to emphasize my inadequacies to highlight his own value. He'd developed a particular talent for backhanded compliments delivered in front of audiences. "Spencer's so grounded," he'd say at family dinners. "No corporate ladder climbing stress for him. Must be nice to have such simple needs." Or, "I really admire how Spencer doesn't let expectations pressure him. Not everyone needs to achieve at higher levels." The comments about my military service had started gradually. First, casual observations about how I never talked about my time in the service, delivered with faux concern about whether I was processing my experiences properly. Then questions about why I kept my medals displayed, if they represented traumatic memories. Finally, suggestions that perhaps my reticence indicated there wasn't much to discuss. I'd endured it all with the same discipline I'd learned in the military mission first. Personal feelings secondary. Sarah was happy in her family, relationships, and I'd learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting. Besides, what did it matter what Marcus thought? I knew what I'd done, what I'd sacrificed, what I'd earned. His opinions couldn't change the truth. But yesterday had crossed a line I hadn't known existed, making his accusations public, turning my service into entertainment for his audience, holding my Purple Heart like a prop in his comedy routine that went beyond family dynamics into something that demanded response. The trust documents showed exactly how dependent Marcus really was on the family's good opinion. His position at Richard's firm provided not just his income but his entire social identity. His house was financed through family connections, his children's education funded through trust provisions, his lifestyle entirely dependent on maintaining his status as the favored son-in-law. I folded the papers carefully and put them away. Understanding the family dynamics was important, but it wouldn't change what I needed to do. This wasn't about money or social standing or family politics. This was about something more fundamental: the honor of men and women who'd served their country with distinction, who'd earned their recognition through blood and sacrifice. Marcus had made this about military service when he questioned my medals. He'd opened a door he didn't understand, into a world where different rules applied and different consequences followed. In his comfortable civilian life, he could say whatever he wanted without facing serious repercussions. But military honor was protected by more than just social conventions. It was time to make some phone calls. The Pentagon directory sat heavy in my hands as I flipped through pages I hadn't opened in 5 years. The thick official publication contained contact information for military personnel and departments, a resource I'd kept from my service days, but had never thought I'd need in civilian life. I found Colonel James Mitchell's information on page 247. He'd been promoted twice since I'd last spoken to him, now serving as Deputy Director of Military Personnel Records. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who'd once led our unit through some of the most dangerous missions in Afghanistan now oversaw the very department responsible for maintaining the integrity of military service records. My finger traced the phone number I'd memorized years ago, but had never dialed. Jim Mitchell had been more than a commanding officer. He'd been a mentor, a father figure to young soldiers far from home. He'd made it clear when I retired that his door was always open, that the brotherhood of service didn't end with discharge. Papers I'd never called because I'd wanted to prove I could make it in civilian life without leaning on military connections. Pride, maybe, or stubbornness. The belief that my service record should speak for itself, that respect should be earned through daily actions rather than past accomplishments. But Marcus had changed the rules of engagement. He'd made this public, questioned my honor in front of witnesses, turned my service into a punchline for his entertainment. This wasn't about personal feelings anymore. It was about protecting the integrity of military honors, about defending the truth against deliberate lies. I picked up the phone and dialed before I could second-guess myself. Pentagon, Military Personnel Records, Colonel Mitchell's office. The voice was crisp, professional, unmistakably military. "This is Master Sergeant Spencer Banks, retired. I'd like to speak with Colonel Mitchell if he's available." "Hold, please, Master Sergeant." The hold music was some generic government composition, but it couldn't mask the sound of my heart beating faster than it had in years. I was about to cross a bridge I couldn't uncross, to set in motion forces that would reach far beyond my quiet suburban life. Spencer Banks. The voice that came on the line was older but unmistakably Jim Mitchell. "I'll be damned. How are you, soldier?" "I'm well, sir. Thank you for taking my call, sir." "Come on, Spencer. We've been through too much together for that kind of formality. What's on your mind?" "It's not like you to call unless something serious is happening." I took a deep breath and explained the situation: the family barbecue, Marcus's public accusations, the laughter from people who'd never worn a uniform. I kept my tone factual, professional, but I could hear the edge creeping into my voice as I described watching my Purple Heart being held up as evidence of fraud. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if we'd been disconnected. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Mitchell finally said, and his voice had taken on the tone I remembered from briefings before dangerous missions. "A civilian publicly accused you of stolen valor, claimed your medals were purchased online, and did this in front of witnesses." "Yes, sir, and this person has no military service record of his own. None that I'm aware of." Another pause, shorter this time. "Spencer, I need you to understand something. Stolen valor isn't just an insult, it's a federal crime. When someone makes public accusations like this, especially against a decorated veteran, it becomes a matter of official interest." I hadn't expected the conversation to take this turn so quickly. "I'm not looking to destroy anyone's life, Jim. I just want the truth to be known. The truth is exactly what we're going to establish. I'm going to need you to send me a written statement detailing exactly what happened, including the names of witnesses. Can you do that? Of course. Good. And Spencer, you might want to prepare yourself. When the Pentagon gets involved in stolen valor cases, we don't do it quietly. The military takes these accusations very seriously, especially when they're directed at soldiers who actually earn their decorations. After I hung up, I sat in my workshop staring at the phone. I'd expected support, maybe some official validation of my service record. I hadn't anticipated that my single phone call would trigger what sounded like a formal investigation. But as I thought about it, I realized I shouldn't have been surprised. The military protected its own, especially when it came to matters of honor and integrity. Marcus had made a serious accusation against a veteran with a distinguished service record. In the civilian world, that might be dismissed as family drama. In the military world, it was an attack on the institution itself. I spent the next hour writing out a detailed statement, including everything I could remember about the barbecue incident. I listed the witnesses, described Marcus's exact words, and provided context about the ongoing family dynamics. When I finished, I had 3 pages of single-spaced text that read like an official report. As I prepared to email the statement to Mitchell, my phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the caller ID. Spencer, Marcus called me this morning. He's panicking about something. He kept asking whether you had any military connections, whether you might try to cause trouble for him. What did you do? I looked at the statement on my computer screen, my cursor hovering over the send button. I made a phone call to an old friend. What kind of friend? The kind who takes stolen valor accusations very seriously. The silence on Sarah's end told me she was beginning to understand that yesterday's humiliation had consequences her family hadn't anticipated. Marcus had treated my service as a joke, but the United States military had a different sense of humor. Spencer, maybe we should talk to him. Try to work this out privately before what? I interrupted gently. Before he faces consequences for publicly calling a decorated veteran a fraud. Sarah, he made this public. He can deal with the public response. I pressed send on the email and leaned back in my chair. The wheels were in motion now, and there would be no stopping them. Marcus wanted to question my military service, and now he was going to get a very thorough education in exactly what that service had entailed. 3 days after my call to Mitchell, I received an email that made me understand just how seriously the military was taking Marcus's accusations. It wasn't from Mitchell himself, but from Major General Patricia Hawkins, Director of Military Personnel Records. The message was brief and formal. Master Sergeant Banks, your service record and the circumstances you've reported are under official review. Please expect contact from our office within 48 hours. Your decades of distinguished service to our nation will not be dishonored without appropriate response. I stared at the email for several minutes, trying to process what it meant. A Major General 2 stars had personally reviewed my case. This had escalated far beyond what I'd anticipated when I made that first phone call. My phone rang before I could fully absorb the implications. Spencer, it's Jim Mitchell. We need to talk. I got an email from Major General Hawkins. I know. She's personally interested in your case. Spencer, when I started looking into your service record to prepare our response, I discovered something I didn't know about your time in Afghanistan. I felt a chill run down my spine. There were aspects of my service that remained classified, operations I couldn't discuss even with family. What did you find? The incident that earned you the Distinguished Service Cross. The one that's still partially classified. Do you remember Operation Silent Guardian? The name hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't heard it spoken aloud in 15 years, hadn't allowed myself to think about it in almost as long. Jim, I know you can't talk about the details, but I can tell you that your actions during that operation saved not just American lives, but prevented what intelligence analysis later determined would have been a significant terrorist attack on civilian targets. Your commanding officer's recommendation for the DSC specifically noted that your actions were above and beyond anything that could reasonably be expected from any soldier. I had never told anyone about Operation Silent Guardian, not even Sarah. The mission had been classified at the highest levels, involving intelligence that couldn't be made public without compromising ongoing operations. I'd received the Distinguished Service Cross in a private ceremony with no family present, and the citation had been sealed. Why are you bringing this up now? I asked. Because Major General Hawkins has decided that the circumstances warrant declassifying portions of your record. Not the operational details, but enough to demonstrate the caliber of soldier Marcus has accused of buying medals online. The implications began to sink in. Jim, I never wanted this to become a public spectacle. Too late for that, my friend. Marcus made it public when he decided to humiliate a decorated veteran in front of witnesses. Now he's going to learn exactly who he insulted. Mitchell explained that word had spread through military networks about the incident. My former unit members, many now in senior positions throughout the military, had been personally offended by the accusations. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the soldier I'd saved in Afghanistan, was now a command sergeant major at Fort Bragg. Master Sergeant Williams, who'd served 3 tours with me, had retired to become a senior instructor at the Military Personnel Records School. The Brotherhood doesn't forget. Spencer, you kept quiet about your service for 15 years. Never asked for anything. Never leveraged your record for personal gain. But when some civilian punk decides you're an easy target, well, ... Mitchell's voice carried a hard edge. Let's just say we take that personally. Over the next hour, Mitchell laid out what was happening behind the scenes. The Pentagon had opened an official inquiry into Marcus's stolen valor allegations. They'd also begun investigating Marcus himself, since accusations of this nature often came from people trying to cover their own fraudulent claims. We've already found some interesting things about your brother-in-law, Mitchell said. Did you know he's been claiming veteran status to get discounts at various businesses? Has a veteran parking placard on his BMW. I hadn't known, but it didn't surprise me. Marcus's sense of entitlement extended into every area of his life. What happens now? Now Marcus gets a phone call from the Pentagon. A very official, very serious phone call, explaining that making false accusations against decorated veterans is a federal crime. And if we find evidence that he's been fraudulently claiming veteran status himself, well, that's a whole different level of problem. After I hung up, I sat in my workshop holding the faded unit photo Mitchell had mentioned. 15 faces looked back at me, young soldiers who'd trusted each other with their lives in places most Americans couldn't pronounce. 3 of them hadn't made it home. The rest had scattered across the country after their service ended, building quiet civilian lives just as I had. I'd lost touch with most of them over the years, by choice. It was easier to build a new identity as Spencer the mechanic than to carry the weight of being Spencer, the war hero. I'd wanted to prove that I could succeed in civilian life on my own merits, without trading on my military record. But looking at those faces now, I realized I'd been naive. Military service created bonds that transcended time and distance. When one veteran was attacked, it was an attack on all of them. Marcus hadn't just insulted me, he'd insulted every person in that photograph. Every person who'd worn the uniform. Every person who'd earned their recognition through sacrifice rather than inheritance. My phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah. Marcus called Dad. He's having some kind of panic attack. Says the Pentagon is investigating him. What's happening? I looked at the unit photo again, at the faces of men who'd trusted me to have their backs in combat. For 15 years, I'd had no one's back, had stood alone, had tried to be an island. In a world that valued connections and mutual support, it was time to let my brothers have my back for a change. I typed back. Marcus wanted to know about my military service. Now he's getting a comprehensive education. Sarah found me in the garage that evening, holding a cardboard box I'd retrieved from the attic earlier that day. Her face was pale, her hands shaking slightly as she approached. I need to show you something, she said quietly. I went looking through your things today. I know I should have asked, but Marcus has everyone so upset, and I needed to understand. She stopped, took a deep breath. Spencer, why didn't you ever tell me about any of this? She held up my service complete files I'd stored away 15 years ago and never mentioned. Not just the basic discharge papers, but the detailed commendation records. The classified operation summaries that had been declassified over the years. The letters of recommendation from commanding officers. Her hands trembled as she read from one of the documents. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. Spencer, this says you saved an entire Afghan village from a terrorist attack. That you spent 18 hours behind enemy lines, coordinating evacuations while wounded. I'd hoped she'd never have to read those reports. They contained details I'd spent years trying to forget. Actions I'd taken in circumstances no one should have to face. Sarah, there are letters here from soldiers you saved. From their families. From Afghan civilians, whose children are alive because of what you did. Her voice broke. There's a letter from the President of the United States thanking you for your service. And I've been married to you for 12 years without knowing any of this. She sat down on my workbench, the papers scattered around her like pieces of a puzzle she was finally seeing assembled. The purple heart that Marcus held up yesterday, it wasn't your only medal, was it? I shook my head. No. How many, Sarah? It doesn't matter how many, she repeated, more firmly. I opened the box I'd been holding and showed her. 2 bronze stars, one with valor device. The purple heart with oak leaf cluster, indicating multiple wounds. The Distinguished Service Cross, the military's second highest decoration for valor. Campaign medals from 3 different theaters of operation. Commendation medals I'd almost forgotten about. She stared at the collection in silence for several minutes. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. You're a war hero. An actual, decorated war hero. And you've been fixing cars for the past 15 years, like none of this ever happened. I wanted a normal life, I said simply. I wanted to be valued for who I was, not what I'd done in the military. But Spencer, this is who you are. These actions, this service, is part of you. She picked up one of the letters from a soldier I'd pulled from a burning vehicle. This man has 3 children, who wouldn't exist if you hadn't risked your life to save their father. How is that not something to be proud of? I sat down beside her on the workbench. Because every medal represents someone who didn't make it home. Every commendation is a reminder of friends I couldn't save. Missions where I wasn't fast enough, or smart enough, or brave enough to prevent losses. She was quiet for a long time, processing information that reframed 15 years of marriage. Is that why you have nightmares sometimes? Why you leave the room when war movies come on? I nodded. Some memories don't fade. Some images don't disappear just because you want them to. And my family has been treating you like you're some kind of underachiever who settled for manual labor because you lacked ambition. The anger in her voice was directed inward, at herself and her family. Marcus has been questioning your service while you were keeping quiet about being one of the most decorated soldiers of your generation. Sarah, I need you to understand I didn't keep this secret to make anyone feel bad. I kept it secret because I wanted to build something new, something that wasn't defined by war and loss and trauma. She picked up a photograph from the box my unit after our final mission, mud-stained and exhausted but alive. Who are these men? My brothers, I said simply. The people who had my back when everything was falling apart around us. Are they the ones who are helping you now? With whatever's happening to Marcus? I met her eyes. When someone attacks one veteran's service record, they attack all of us. I spent 15 years trying to stand alone, trying to prove I didn't need the brotherhood anymore. But brotherhood isn't something you outgrow. She folded the presidential letter carefully and handed it back to me. I've been a terrible wife, haven't I? All these years, I've been trying to get you to be more ambitious, to use your experience for better opportunities. I never understood that you'd already achieved more than most people could imagine. You've been a wonderful wife. You married a mechanic who was honest about what he wanted from life. The rest of this, I gestured at the medals, it's history. No, she said firmly. It's not history, it's who you are. And Marcus is about to learn exactly who he decided to humiliate at a family barbecue. She stood up and began putting the documents back in order, with careful precision. Spencer, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be completely honest with me, of course. When this is over, when Marcus faces whatever consequences are coming his way, what happens to us? To our marriage? I've spent 12 years not knowing the most important things about the man I married. I took her hands in mine, feeling the weight of secrets finally lifted. What happens is that we build something better. Something based on complete truth instead of careful silences. I should have trusted you with this years ago. Yes, you should have, she agreed. But I also should have asked better questions. Should have seen what was right in front of me. She paused. Spencer, I'm proud of you. Not just for your service, but for choosing to build a quiet, honest life afterward. I understand now why you didn't want to trade on your military record. But Marcus crossed a line yesterday. He didn't just insult you, he insulted every person who ever served, every family who ever lost someone in uniform. Some insults deserve consequences. I pulled her close, holding her as she finally understood the man she'd married. Outside, our quiet suburban life continued unchanged. But inside our garage, surrounded by the evidence of battles fought in distant places, we were finally completely honest with each other for the first time in our marriage. The military investigation file that arrived via secure email 3 days later was more comprehensive than I'd expected. Colonel Mitchell had warned me it was coming, but seeing the official Pentagon letterhead and classification markings brought back memories of briefings in secured facilities half a world away. The investigation had moved with military efficiency. Within 72 hours of my initial report, Pentagon investigators had conducted background checks, interviewed witnesses from the barbecue, and begun a thorough review of Marcus's claims about veteran status. What they'd discovered was damning. Marcus hadn't just made false accusations against me, he'd been living a lie for years. The investigators had found evidence of multiple instances where he'd claimed veteran status for personal benefit, veteran parking permits, military discounts at restaurants and retail stores, preferential treatment in business dealings based on fabricated service claims. The most serious discovery was his use of a counterfeit military ID card to support these claims. The document was sophisticated enough to fool civilian businesses, but wouldn't have passed scrutiny at any military installation. According to the investigation report, creating and using false military identification was a federal felony, carrying significant penalties. But the investigators had uncovered something else that made my stomach turn. Marcus had been telling people for months that he was a former Navy SEAL, complete with detailed stories about classified missions he'd supposedly undertaken. He'd used these fabricated credentials to secure consulting contracts with businesses seeking security expertise. The irony was staggering. While publicly questioning my legitimate service record, Marcus had been privately building an entire false identity around military service he'd never performed. He'd stolen not just valor, but actual financial benefit from his lies. The fraud is extensive, Colonel Mitchell explained during our follow-up call. We're looking at violations of the Stolen Valor Act, wire fraud, identity theft, and potentially several other federal charges. This isn't just about his insult to you anymore. This is about systematic criminal behavior. I sat in my workshop, reading through the investigation findings, trying to process how thoroughly Marcus had destroyed his own life with his lies. The barbecue incident had been the catalyst, but the investigation had revealed years of deception that went far beyond family drama. Jim, I never wanted to destroy the man's career, I said. I just wanted him to acknowledge the truth about my service. Spencer, you didn't destroy his career. He did that himself when he decided to build it on stolen valor. What you did was expose a criminal who was profiting from other people's service and sacrifice. The report included testimonies from several witnesses to Marcus's false claims. Business associates who'd hired him based on his fabricated SEAL credentials. Restaurant managers who'd provided military discounts based on his counterfeit ID. Even a charity event where he'd been honored as a veteran guest speaker, delivering a speech about combat experiences he'd never had. Each instance represented not just a lie, but theft from legitimate veterans who'd earned those benefits through actual service. Every discount Marcus had claimed was money taken from a business owner who was trying to honor real military service. Every contract he'd secured through false credentials was work stolen from legitimate security professionals. The investigation had also revealed the psychological profile behind his behavior. According to the FBI consultant's assessment, Marcus exhibited classic signs of narcissistic personality disorder combined with pathological lying. His need to be perceived as important and accomplished had driven him to increasingly elaborate deceptions. His attacks on my service record weren't random cruelty, they were projection. By questioning my legitimacy, he was deflecting attention from his own fraudulent claims. In his twisted logic, if he could discredit a real veteran, it would somehow validate his fake credentials. The military investigators had been particularly thorough in documenting Marcus's false narratives. They'd recorded phone conversations where he described firefights he'd never experienced, missions he'd never undertaken, training he'd never received. The level of detail in his fabrications suggested years of preparation and research. What struck me most was how unnecessary it all had been. Marcus had a successful career in finance, a comfortable lifestyle, a position of respect in his community. He'd thrown it all away for the temporary ego boost of pretending to be something he wasn't. The federal prosecutor is very interested in this case, Mitchell continued. Stolen valor prosecutions send a strong message about respecting military service. They want to make an example that will deter others from similar fraud. I thought about the real veterans I knew who struggled with employment, who dealt with physical and psychological wounds from their service, who faced challenges transitioning to civilian life. Meanwhile, Marcus had been profiting from fabricated claims about service he'd never performed, hardships he'd never endured, sacrifices he'd never made. What happens now? I asked. Now the case goes to federal prosecutors. Marcus will be arrested and charged within the next few days. The evidence is overwhelming, and given the extent of the fraud, he's looking at significant prison time. After I hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my workshop, surrounded by the tools of my honest trade. Tomorrow, I'd go back to fixing engines, diagnosing problems, solving mechanical puzzles with straightforward solutions. But tonight, I was processing the reality that my single phone call had unraveled years of criminal deception. Sarah found me there an hour later, her face drawn with exhaustion from fielding panicked calls from her family. Marcus hired a lawyer today, she said quietly. He's trying to claim this is all a misunderstanding, that he never meant to impersonate a veteran. I showed her the investigation file, watching her face change as she read through the documented evidence of systematic fraud. When she finished, she looked up with tears in her eyes. He wasn't just lying about you, she whispered. He was lying about everything. For years, yes, and our whole family believed him. We thought he was this successful, accomplished man who'd served his country and built a career through talent and hard work. People believe what they want to believe, I said gently. Marcus told them what they wanted to hear. She was quiet for several minutes, processing the magnitude of the deception. Spencer, I'm so sorry. Not just for yesterday, but for years of not seeing what was right in front of me. For letting him diminish you while he was living a complete lie. I pulled her close, feeling the weight of truth finally settling between us. The important thing is that we see clearly now. All of us. The phone call came at 6 in the morning, 3 days after I'd received the investigation file. Marcus's voice was barely recognizable, hoarse, desperate, stripped of all the confidence I'd grown accustomed to over the years. Spencer, please, I need to talk to you. Can you meet me somewhere private? I was already dressed for work, coffee mug in hand, as I prepared to leave for the shop. Marcus, I don't think that's a good idea. Please, just give me 5 minutes. I'll come to your house, your shop, wherever you want. I just need to explain. Explain what? I kept my voice calm, professional. Explain how you've been living a lie for years. Explain how you used fake military credentials to defraud businesses. Or explain how you thought it was acceptable to humiliate a veteran at a family gathering. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. I know you called the Pentagon. I know they're investigating me. Spencer, I'm looking at federal charges. Prison time. My career is over. My marriage is falling apart. Everything is what? Marcus collapsing because it was built on lies. I never meant for it to go this far. The military thing, it started small. Just little comments to impress clients, make myself seem more interesting. It spiraled out of control, and I couldn't find a way to take it back. I sat down at my kitchen table, Sarah still asleep upstairs, and listened to a man whose entire world was crashing down around him. Despite everything he'd done, I felt a strange sort of pity for him. When did it start? I asked. College. I was dating this girl whose brother was a Marine. She was so proud of him, talked about his service constantly. I made up a story about considering military service myself. Said I'd been accepted to officer candidate school, but decided to pursue business. Instead, she was impressed, and it felt good to see that respect in her eyes. The confession poured out of him like water through a broken dam. Years of small lies that had grown into elaborate fabrications. Business deals secured through false veteran credentials. Social connections built on fictional military experiences. A charity board position obtained by claiming combat service he'd never performed. The fake ID, where did you get it? Online. There are websites that sell them for movie props, Halloween costumes. I told myself it wasn't really fraud if I only used it for discounts. Small things. But then businesses started asking for verification, and I needed something that looked official. Each revelation made the scope of his deception more clear. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, or a misunderstanding that had gotten out of hand. This was systematic fraud spanning nearly a decade, involving dozens of businesses and hundreds of false claims. Why did you target my service record? I asked. Why make this personal? Another long pause. Because you made me nervous. You had actual medals, actual service, but you never talked about it. Never leveraged it. I thought if people started asking questions about military service at family gatherings, they might notice inconsistencies in my stories. So I decided to discredit you first, make people think your service wasn't legitimate. The calculated nature of his attack hit me like a physical blow. This hadn't been spontaneous mockery or drunken stupidity. He'd deliberately planned to destroy my reputation to protect his own lies. You were going to destroy my honor to cover your fraud. I panicked. Okay. I've been living with this lie for so long, and you were the only real veteran in the family. I thought if I could make people doubt your service, they'd never question mine. Marcus, do you understand what you've done? Not just to me, but to every legitimate veteran. Every time you claimed military discounts, you stole from businesses trying to honor real service. Every contract you got through false credentials was taken from someone who actually earned those qualifications. I know, and I'm sorry, Spencer, I'm desperate here. Is there any way you could call off the investigation? Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I almost laughed at the absurdity of his request. Marcus, this isn't my investigation anymore. This is a federal criminal case. The Pentagon doesn't drop stolen valor prosecutions because someone apologizes. But you could talk to them. Explain that I wasn't really trying to hurt anyone, weren't you? You stood in front of my family and called me a fraud. You held my Purple Heart medal I earned with my blood and told everyone it was fake. How is that not trying to hurt someone? The desperation in his voice intensified. I'll do anything, Spencer. I'll make a public apology, donate money to veteran charities, whatever you want. Just please help me fix this. You can't fix this. Marcus, you spent years building a career on stolen valor, defrauding businesses, lying to everyone who trusted you. The only thing you can do now is face the consequences honestly. They're talking about 3 to 5 years in federal prison. My kids will grow up with their father in jail. Jennifer is filing for divorce. Her family won't even speak to me. I've lost everything. You didn't lose everything, Marcus. You threw it away. You had a successful career, a loving family, a comfortable life. You destroyed all of that because pretending to be a veteran was more important to you than living honestly. I made a mistake. No, I interrupted firmly. A mistake is forgetting to file paperwork or miscalculating a business deal. What you did was commit federal crimes for years while attacking the honor of people who actually served their country. The phone went quiet, except for the sound of Marcus crying. Despite everything he'd done, hearing a grown man break down completely was difficult to witness. Spencer, please. I'm begging you. Isn't there some way to make this right? I thought about the real veterans I knew who struggled with employment because they didn't have fake credentials to impress employers. I thought about the businesses Marcus had defrauded, the charity that had honored him as a veteran guest speaker, the clients who'd paid premium prices for security expertise he didn't possess. There is a way to make this right, I said finally. Plead guilty. Accept responsibility for what you've done. Cooperate fully with the prosecution. And spend whatever time you have left before sentencing making amends to every person in business you defrauded. That's not what I meant. That's the only path forward, Marcus. You can't undo years of systematic fraud with an apology. You can't buy your way out of federal charges. The only thing left is to face this with whatever dignity you have remaining. And you won't help me. I won't help you escape justice, if that's what you're asking. But Marcus, when you get out of prison, if you want to build an honest life, if you want to make real amends to the veteran community you dishonored, I'll be willing to talk. Until then, you need to deal with the consequences of your choices. I hung up and sat in my kitchen as the sun rose over our quiet neighborhood. In a few hours, I'd go to work fixing engines, solving mechanical problems with straightforward solutions. But this morning, I was processing the reality that some problems couldn't be fixed, they could only be faced. Sarah appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of my voice. Was that Marcus? Yes, he wanted me to help him escape the consequences of what he's done, and I told him the truth. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Some trust, once broken, can't be repaired. The only thing left is justice. The Pentagon's official response arrived exactly 1 week after Marcus's desperate phone call. The letter bore the seal of the Department of Defense and was signed by Major General Patricia Hawkins herself, a document that carried the full weight of the United States military establishment. I read it twice before calling Sarah to come see it. To Master Sergeant Spencer Banks, retired. The Department of Defense has completed its investigation into allegations of stolen valor made against you by Mr. Marcus Whitmore. After thorough review of your service record and the circumstances surrounding these accusations, we find them to be completely without merit and an affront to your distinguished military service. Your 20-year career, including 3 combat deployments and numerous commendations for valor, represents the highest traditions of military service. The allegations made against you constitute not only false accusations, but a deliberate attempt to dishonor a decorated veteran who served his country with distinction. Accordingly, the Department of Defense is taking the following actions. First, we are issuing this formal statement, clearing your name of all accusations and affirming the legitimacy of your service record and decorations. Second, we are referring Mr. Whitmore's case to federal prosecutors for violations of the Stolen Valor Act, wire fraud, and related charges based on evidence of systematic false claims regarding military service. Third, we are recommending you for public recognition of your service, including declassification of certain aspects of your record that demonstrate your exceptional contributions to national security. Your nation remains grateful for your service, and we will not allow it to be dishonored by those who never wore the uniform. Sarah finished reading and looked up with tears in her eyes. Spencer, they're not just defending you, they're going to honor you publicly. I stared at the letterhead, trying to process what this meant. In 1 week, I'd gone from being a quietly retired veteran to the subject of an official Pentagon vindication. The military hadn't just investigated Marcus's claims, they'd turned the full force of their institutional authority toward protecting my honor. There's more, I said, showing her the second page. It was a phone log documenting calls made directly to Marcus from various Pentagon offices, the psychological impact of receiving official government calls about his stolen valor. Claims must have been devastating. The first call had come from Colonel Mitchell's office, formally notifying Marcus that he was under investigation for false accusations against a decorated veteran. The second had come from the Military Personnel Records Division, requesting documentation of his claimed military service. The third had been from the FBI's Stolen Valor Task Force, informing him that he was now the subject of a federal criminal investigation. Each call had been documented with timestamps and brief summaries of Marcus's responses. According to the notes, he'd become increasingly panicked and incoherent as the scope of the investigation became clear. They called him personally? Sarah asked, reading over my shoulder. Multiple times. From different departments. Can you imagine sitting in your office and having the Pentagon call to question your military service claims? The psychological warfare aspect was unmistakable. The military had methodically dismantled Marcus's world, not through public humiliation, but through the steady application of official authority. Each call had reinforced that he was now dealing with the federal government, not just family drama. The phone rang as we were finishing the letter. Colonel Mitchell's voice was warm with satisfaction when I answered. Spencer, I hope you received our letter. I did, Jim. This is far more than I expected when I made that first call. You need to understand something about military culture, my friend. We protect our own, especially when they've been honorable enough never to ask for protection before. Marcus picked the wrong veteran to target. Mitchell explained that the case had gained attention at the highest levels of the Pentagon. Multiple flag officers had personally reviewed my service record and been impressed not just by my combat decorations, but by my conduct after retirement. 15 years of quiet civilian life, never trading on your military record, never asking for special treatment. That's exactly the kind of veteran we want representing our institution. When some fraud decides to attack that integrity, we take it very personally. The conversation turned to the broader implications of the case. Marcus's systematic stolen valor fraud had been more extensive than initially discovered. Federal investigators had found evidence of similar false claims dating back nearly 10 years, involving hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraudulent benefits and contracts. He's not just facing stolen valor charges anymore, Mitchell explained. This is wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, tax evasion. He built an entire criminal enterprise around fake military credentials. The irony was staggering. Marcus had attacked my legitimate service record, while his own fake military identity had been the foundation of years of federal crimes. His attempt to discredit me had triggered an investigation that exposed him as exactly the kind of fraud he'd accused me of being. What happens now with the public recognition? I asked. Major General Hawkins wants to present you with a formal commendation for your service, including recognition of previously classified operations. It would be a public ceremony, with media coverage, full military honors. The prospect of public recognition felt surreal after 15 years of deliberately avoiding attention. Jim, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that level of publicity. I understand your hesitation, but Spencer, this is bigger than just you now. The military needs to send a clear message that we protect veterans who've served with honor. Your case is going to deter others from making false accusations against legitimate veterans. After we hung up, Sarah and I sat in our kitchen processing the magnitude of what was unfolding. What had started as a family barbecue insult had become a federal case with national implications. "Are you going to accept the ceremony?" she asked. I thought about the young veterans I'd met over the years, struggling with the transition to civilian life, dealing with people who didn't understand or respect their service. Maybe public recognition would help them, would demonstrate that their sacrifices mattered, that institutions existed to protect their honor. "Yes," I said finally. "Not for me, but for every veteran who's ever been questioned or diminished by people who never served." Sarah smiled and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you, Spencer, for your service, for your integrity, and for finally letting the world see who you really are." Outside our window, the suburban neighborhood continued its quiet routine, unaware that one of its residents had just become the center of a federal investigation that would reshape how stolen valor cases were prosecuted. But inside our kitchen, surrounded by official Pentagon correspondence, we were finally living in complete truth. The first cracks in Sarah's family appeared 3 days after the Pentagon letter arrived. It started with a phone call from her mother, Patricia, whose voice carried a tension I'd never heard in 15 years of knowing her. "Sarah, we need to talk about this situation with Marcus. Your father and I are very concerned about the direction things are taking." Sarah put the call on speaker so I could hear. "What direction is that, Mom?" "This investigation, these federal charges tearing our family apart. Jennifer is devastated. The children are asking questions we don't know how to answer. And frankly, we're wondering if Spencer couldn't find a way to dial back his involvement." I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept quiet. This was Sarah's conversation to have. Dial back his involvement. Sarah's voice carried an edge I recognized. "Mom, Spencer didn't start this. Marcus publicly humiliated him, called him a fraud, made accusations that turned out to be projection of his own criminal behavior. Well, yes, Marcus made some poor choices, but this has gone far beyond what anyone intended. Federal prosecutors, prison time, surely there's a way to handle this within the family." Sarah looked at me, her expression a mixture of disbelief and growing anger. "Handle what within the family? Years of systematic fraud, criminal impersonation of veterans. Mom, Marcus has been lying to all of us for a decade." The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably before Patricia continued. "Your father has been looking into the financial implications. Marcus's legal troubles are affecting the entire family trust structure. His position at the firm is terminated, obviously, and there are potential liability issues from the contracts he secured through false credentials." The real concern was emerging. This wasn't about family unity or Marcus's well-being, it was about money. The Whitmore family fortune was structured in ways that made Marcus's criminal exposure a threat to everyone's financial interests. "Mom, are you asking Spencer to protect the family money by letting Marcus escape justice for attacking his military service? I'm asking if there isn't a way to resolve this that doesn't destroy everyone's lives. Marcus made mistakes, but he's family. And frankly, Spencer, if you'd been more open about your military service over the years, maybe Marcus wouldn't have felt the need to question it." The blame shifting was breathtaking. Somehow, my decision to keep my service record private had created the circumstances that forced Marcus to commit federal crimes and attack my honor. Sarah stood up abruptly. "Mom, I'm going to stop you right there. Spencer served his country with distinction for 20 years, earned multiple decorations for valor, and chose to build a quiet civilian life afterward. Marcus chose to build his career on stolen valor and criminal fraud. Those are not equivalent moral positions. Sarah, you're being dramatic. This is about family loyalty. No, this is about right and wrong. And you're asking me to choose between supporting my husband's honor and protecting a criminal who attacked that honor for his own benefit." The conversation deteriorated from there. Patricia accused Sarah of being manipulated by me, suggested that my military background had made me unnecessarily aggressive in pursuing justice, and implied that a truly loving family member would find ways to protect everyone rather than allowing one person's mistakes to destroy the whole structure. When Sarah finally hung up, she was shaking with anger. "I can't believe she just asked me to convince you to help Marcus escape federal charges to protect the family's financial interests." I pulled her close, feeling the weight of family dynamics I'd never fully understood. "Sarah, I need you to know if protecting your family relationships is more important than this investigation. I can find ways to minimize my involvement." She pulled back to look at me directly. "Spencer, don't you dare. This isn't about family relationships anymore. This is about integrity, about truth, about standing up for what's right. She paused. And honestly, I'm starting to understand that some family relationships aren't worth protecting if they require you to compromise your values. The phone rang again, this time Sarah's sister Jennifer, Marcus's wife. Her voice was raw from crying, desperate in a way that made my chest tight with sympathy. Sarah, please, you have to help us. The lawyers are saying Marcus could get 5 years in federal prison. 5 years? My children will grow up with their father in jail. I'm losing my house, my marriage, everything. Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. Jennifer, I'm so sorry this is happening. But Marcus chose this path when he decided to build his life on lies and attack Spencer's service record. But Spencer could fix this. He has military connections now. He could tell them Marcus didn't mean any harm, that it was just family drama. That got out of hand. Jennifer, Marcus committed federal crimes. For years. This isn't about family drama. This is about systematic fraud that hurt real veterans and legitimate businesses. I don't care about any of that. Jennifer's voice cracked. I care about my family, about my children. Spencer, please. You're a good man. Surely you don't want to see innocent children suffer because their father made some mistakes. The emotional manipulation was sophisticated but transparent. Frame Marcus's crimes as mistakes, position his children as innocent victims of my choices, appealed to my sense of compassion, to override my commitment to justice. Jennifer, I said quietly, I understand you're in pain. But Marcus's children aren't suffering because of my actions, they're suffering because of his. I didn't force him to steal valor, defraud businesses, or attack my service record. Those were his choices. But you could end this. You could make it go away. No, I couldn't. This is a federal criminal investigation, based on evidence of systematic fraud. The Pentagon doesn't drop cases because families asked nicely. The conversation ended with Jennifer sobbing and Sarah promising to help her find resources for dealing with the legal and financial crisis, but not promising to undermine the investigation. After we hung up, Sarah sat in silence for several minutes. Before speaking, they want me to choose between you and them. And there's no choice to make. You're my husband, and you're the one telling the truth. They want me to protect a criminal who attacked your honor, and they're making it about family loyalty. She paused. That's not family loyalty. That's enabling criminal behavior. I realized that Marcus's actions had forced everyone to reveal their true priorities. When forced to choose between comfortable lies and uncomfortable truths, Sarah's family was choosing the lies. But Sarah herself was choosing truth, even when it meant standing against her own blood relatives. I'm proud of you, I told her. I'm ashamed it took this long for me to see clearly. But Spencer, we're going to get through this together, and we're going to do it with our integrity intact. Outside, the autumn leaves were beginning to fall, and inside our house, we were discovering what our marriage looked like when built on complete honesty instead of careful omissions. The phone log that arrived from Colonel Mitchell's office detailed every attempt the Pentagon had made to contact Marcus directly. Reading through it was like watching a man's world systematically dismantled through official channels. Call number 1, October 15th, 10:30 a.m. Initial contact from Military Personnel Records Office. Marcus was informed that allegations of stolen valor had been made against a decorated veteran, and that his role in those allegations was being investigated. Duration, 12 minutes. Notes. Subject became defensive, claimed allegations were misunderstood. Requested details about investigation scope. Call number 2, October 16th, 2:15 p.m. Follow-up from Pentagon Inspector General's office. Marcus was asked to provide documentation supporting his own claims of military service. Duration, 8 minutes. Notes. Subject unable to provide service number, unit assignments, or deployment records. Became agitated when questioned about specific military procedures. Call number 3, October 17th, 9:45 a.m. FBI Stolen Valor Task Force notification call. Marcus was informed he was now subject of federal criminal investigation based on evidence of fraudulent veteran claims. Duration, 23 minutes. Notes. Subject broke down, admitted to exaggerating service record, requested legal representation. Call number 4, October 18th, 3:20 p.m. Pentagon Legal Counsel Office. Marcus was advised of his rights and informed that criminal referral had been made to U.S. Attorney's Office. Duration, 6 minutes. Notes. Subject's attorney present. No substantive discussion. Each call represented another layer of federal authority, recognizing the seriousness of attacking a veteran's service record. But what struck me most was the escalation from personnel records to Inspector General, to FBI, to legal counsel. Marcus had triggered a response that reached into multiple departments of the federal government. Sarah read the log over my shoulder, her face growing pale as she processed the methodical destruction of her brother-in-law's life. They called him 4 times in 4 days. Different departments, different purposes. Each call reinforced that this wasn't going away, that it was getting more serious, not less. The psychological impact must have been devastating. Marcus was accustomed to controlling narratives through charm and manipulation. Suddenly he was facing federal investigators who didn't care about his explanations or his family connections. They wanted documentation he didn't have for service he'd never performed. Look at call number 3, Sarah pointed out. 23 minutes. That's when he broke. I could imagine that conversation, an FBI agent methodically destroying Marcus's fabricated military identity, exposing years of lies with questions about basic military knowledge he couldn't answer. No amount of charm or business acumen could substitute for actual military experience when facing investigators who knew exactly what questions to ask. My phone rang as we were reviewing the log. Colonel Mitchell's voice was grim when I answered. "Spencer, I'm calling to give you a heads up. Marcus contacted our office this morning, trying to negotiate some kind of deal." "What kind of deal?" "He wanted to know if making a public apology to you would influence the criminal referral. His lawyer apparently thinks that showing remorse might lead to reduced charges." The audacity was stunning. Marcus still believed this was about personal grievances that could be resolved through the right combination of apologies and legal maneuvering. He hadn't grasped that federal prosecutors don't negotiate based on hurt feelings. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that stolen valor prosecutions aren't personal disputes. They're federal crimes against military institutions and the veteran community as a whole. His relationship with you is irrelevant to the criminal charges he's facing." Mitchell explained that Marcus's lawyer had also tried approaching the U.S. Attorney's Office directly, offering cooperation in exchange for lenient treatment. The response had been unambiguous. The evidence of systematic fraud was too extensive for plea negotiations until Marcus demonstrated complete accountability for his actions. "He's looking at a minimum of 3 years. Spencer, with the scope of the fraud we've documented, it could be considerably more. His lawyer knows it, which is why they're getting desperate." The conversation turned to preparations for the public ceremony, honoring my service. Major General Hawkins had decided to make it a significant event, with media coverage and multiple flag officers in attendance. The message would be clear. The military protects veterans who've served with honor, and attacks on their integrity will be met with institutional response. "Spencer, there's something else you should know. We've been contacted by several veteran organizations who want to participate in the ceremony. Word has spread through military networks about your case, and there's strong support for making this a statement about protecting veteran honor." After I hung up, Sarah and I sat processing the reality that our quiet suburban life had become the center of a national conversation about stolen valor and veteran rights. The ceremony would be public, with media coverage that would ensure Marcus's crimes became part of the public record. "Are you ready for that level of attention?" Sarah asked. I thought about the young veterans struggling with civilian careers, dealing with employers who didn't understand military experience, facing skepticism about their service from people who'd never worn uniforms. Maybe public recognition would help them feel valued, would demonstrate that their sacrifices mattered to institutions beyond just family and friends. "I'm ready to stand up for every veteran who's ever been questioned by someone who never served," I said. Sarah nodded. "Then we'll face it together. But Spencer, I need to tell you something. My family is going to hate us for this. They're going to blame us for destroying Marcus's life, for bringing shame on the family name, for choosing justice over family loyalty. I know, and I'm okay with that, because they're wrong, and you're right. And sometimes you have to choose between being comfortable and being honest." She picked up the phone log again, studying the systematic way Marcus's lies had been exposed. "You know what strikes me most about this? How thorough they were. They didn't just investigate his accusations against youth, they investigated him. They treated this like the serious crime it was. The military takes stolen valor personally," I explained. "Every fake veteran diminishes the value of real service. Every fraudulent claim makes it harder for legitimate veterans to be believed and respected, and Marcus spent years doing exactly that, stealing recognition that belonged to people like you, profiting from sacrifices he never made." We spent the rest of the evening preparing for the storm we knew was coming. Tomorrow, Marcus would likely be arrested the day after. The media would pick up the story. Within a week, our private family drama would become a public example of how stolen valor prosecutions protected military honor. But tonight, in our quiet house, we were finally at peace with the truth. The local newspaper article appeared online at 6:47 a.m., 3 days after Marcus's arrest had made national news. The headline read, "Local investment advisor charged in extensive stolen valor fraud case. Decorated veteran vindicated after family humiliation." Sarah found it first, sitting at our kitchen table with her morning coffee and her tablet. Her face went pale as she read, and she wordlessly handed me the device. Federal prosecutors have charged Marcus Whitmore, 38, of Riverside Heights, with multiple felonies related to stolen valor fraud spanning nearly a decade. The charges stemmed from an investigation triggered when Whitmore publicly accused his brother-in-law, decorated veteran Spencer Banks, of purchasing fake military medals online. The investigation revealed that Whitmore, who never served in the military, had been systematically impersonating a Navy SEAL to secure business contracts, obtain veteran benefits, and enhance his social standing. Evidence includes fraudulent military identification, false claims to multiple businesses, and documented lies about combat experience he never possessed. Banks, 42, served 20 years in the U.S. Army, including 3 combat deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. His service record includes a Distinguished Service Cross, Bronze Star with Valor, and Purple Heart, among other decorations. Pentagon officials describe him as an exemplary soldier who served his country with distinction and humility. The case has drawn attention from veteran advocacy groups nationwide as an example of how false accusations against legitimate veterans often come from individuals engaged in their own fraudulent activities. The article continued with quotes from federal prosecutors, veteran organizations, and even some of Marcus's former business associates who'd been defrauded by his fake credentials. Reading it felt surreal, seeing our private family drama transformed into a public morality tale about honor, deception, and justice. They interviewed our neighbors, Sarah noted, pointing to a section near the end. "Spencer Banks is one of the most decent men I know," said Robert Chen, who lives next door to the Banks family. "He's helped half the neighborhood with car repairs, never asks for anything in return, never talks about himself. Finding out he's this decorated war hero explains a lot about his character." The article included a photograph of me from my military service. Colonel Mitchell had provided it to the reporter with my permission. I barely recognized the young soldier in the picture, intense and focused in a way that civilian life had softened over the years. But it was the comparison photo that made the biggest impact. Marcus at a charity fundraiser 2 years ago, accepting recognition as a veteran guest speaker, standing next to actual veterans, while wearing a suit decorated with military pins he'd never earned. My phone started ringing before I finished reading the article. The first call was from Rodriguez, the soldier I'd saved in Afghanistan, now a command sergeant major at Fort Bragg. "Spencer, you magnificent bastard. I just read the story. You've been keeping quiet about your service for 15 years while some fraud was running around pretending to be a SEAL." Rodriguez's voice carried the warmth and profanity that marked career soldiers. "Brother, we should have known about this years ago." "Rodriguez, I didn't want to make a big deal. Screw that. You saved my life, earned more decorations than most soldiers see in their careers, and you've been fixing cars like none of that mattered. Man, we've got work to do." Rodriguez explained that veteran organizations across the country were rallying around my case. The story had resonated because it highlighted something many veterans faced: skepticism about their service from people who'd never worn uniforms, combined with fraudsters appropriating military honor for personal gain. "There's going to be a veteran rally at your Pentagon ceremony," Rodriguez continued. "Brothers from all over the country are coming to show support. This case is bigger than just you now. It's about defending every veteran's right to be respected for their actual service." The second call came from a reporter at a national newspaper, requesting an interview about the broader implications of stolen valor fraud. The third was from a veteran advocacy organization, asking if I'd consider speaking at their annual conference. By noon, our quiet suburban street was filled with news vans and reporters seeking neighbors' perspectives on the decorated veteran who'd lived among them, unrecognized for years. Sarah and I watched from our kitchen window as journalists interviewed people we'd known for over a decade. "It's surreal," Sarah said. "Yesterday you were Spencer the mechanic. Today you're Spencer, the war hero, who exposed a major fraud case." "I'm still Spencer the mechanic," I replied. That's not changing. But even as I said it, I knew things had fundamentally shifted. The story had captured public attention because it contained all the elements of a perfect morality tale. Genuine heroism hidden in humility, false bravado exposed through investigation, justice served through institutional power. The afternoon brought more calls. From Marcus's former business associates expressing shock at his deception. From military personnel I'd served with years ago who'd seen the story. From strangers thanking me for my service and for exposing fraud that diminished all veterans. The most difficult call came from Jennifer, Marcus's wife, whose voice was hollow with exhaustion and grief. Spencer, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to say something. She paused, gathering strength. I've spent the last week learning things about my husband that I never knew. Not just the stolen valor, but years of lies about everything. His business success, his background, even stories about his family. Jennifer, I'm sorry you're going through this. No, you're not responsible for this. Marcus is, and I needed you to know that I understand now why you couldn't just make this go away. It wasn't about family drama. It was about him stealing honor from people like you, who actually earned it. She explained that the investigation had revealed other deceptions beyond the stolen valor. Marcus had inflated his educational credentials, lied about family wealth, and created false narratives about business successes that were actually achieved through fraudulent means. The man I thought I married never existed, she said quietly. He was a character Marcus created, and I fell in love with a lie. After we hung up, Sarah and I sat in our living room, watching news coverage of a story that had somehow become our story. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 15 years avoiding attention for my military service. And now that service was front-page news because someone had tried to attack it. Do you regret making that phone call to Colonel Mitchell? Sarah asked. I thought about the young veterans who would read this story and feel validated in their own service. About the businesses that would be more careful about verifying military credentials, about the fraudsters who might think twice before stealing valor from people who'd actually earned it. No, I said finally. Some fights choose you, even when you'd rather avoid them. Marcus chose this fight when he decided my honor was something he could attack for his own benefit. Sarah curled up beside me on the couch. Tomorrow, the Pentagon ceremony will make this even more public. Yes. Are you ready? I looked out our front window at the news vans and reporters. At the neighbors being interviewed about the quiet veteran they'd never really known. At the circus that our private life had become. I'm ready to stand up for every veteran who's ever been questioned by someone who never served. If that requires being public about my own service, then that's what I'll do. Outside, the media continued documenting the story of a decorated veteran who'd lived in humble anonymity until forced to defend his honor against a fraud. Inside our house, we prepared for a ceremony that would honor not just my service, but the principle that military honor deserved institutional protection. The federal indictment arrived via certified mail on a Tuesday morning, thick with legal language that transformed Marcus's lies into formal criminal charges. I read through it carefully, Sarah looking over my shoulder as we processed the magnitude of what the investigation had uncovered. Count 1. Violations of the Stolen Valor Act. 18 U.S.C. Section 704. Multiple instances of falsely claiming military decorations and service for material benefit. Count 2. Wire fraud. 18 U.S.C. Section 1343. Using false military credentials to secure business contracts totaling over $400,000. Count 3. Identity theft. 18 U.S.C. Section 1028. Creating and using fraudulent military identification documents. Count 4. False statements. 18 U.S.C. Section 1001. Making false claims to federal agencies regarding veteran status. Count 5. Tax evasion. 26 U.S.C. Section 7201. Failing to report income from fraudulently obtained contracts. The document detailed a criminal enterprise that had operated for nearly 8 years. Marcus hadn't just stolen valor, he'd built an entire fraudulent identity around military service he'd never performed, using it to secure hundreds of thousands of dollars in contracts, benefits, and social advantages. The evidence was overwhelming. Federal investigators had documented 47 separate instances where Marcus had falsely claimed military service. They'd found the websites where he'd purchased fake military identification. They'd interviewed business owners who'd hired him based on his fabricated SEAL credentials. They'd even recovered deleted emails where he'd researched military terminology to make his lies more convincing. But perhaps most damning was the evidence of premeditation in his attack on my service record. Phone records showed he'd called 3 family members before the barbecue, discussing his plan to expose Spencer's fake military credentials to deflect attention from his own fraudulent claims. He planned it, Sarah said quietly, reading the section that detailed Marcus's preparation for the barbecue confrontation. This wasn't drunken stupidity or spontaneous cruelty. He deliberately planned to destroy your reputation, to protect his lies. The psychological profile, included in the prosecutor's filing, painted a picture of narcissistic personality disorder, combined with pathological lying. Marcus had exhibited classic patterns of stolen valor, fraud, grandiose claims about elite military service, detailed but inconsistent stories about combat experiences, and aggressive defensiveness when questioned about specifics. According to the federal sentencing guidelines, Marcus was facing a minimum of 3 years in federal prison, with the possibility of up to 12 years given the scope and duration of his fraud. The financial restitution alone would likely bankrupt him. He owed money to every business he defrauded, plus penalties and interests. His life is completely destroyed, Sarah observed, though her voice carried no sympathy. He destroyed it himself when he decided that stealing other people's honor was easier than earning his own accomplishments. The phone rang as we were finishing the indictment. Colonel Mitchell's voice was satisfied when I answered. Spencer, I assume you've seen the charges. Just finished reading them. Jim, I had no idea the scope was this extensive. Stolen valor. Cases often start small and grow as investigators dig deeper. Marcus wasn't just a casual liar. He was running a sophisticated criminal operation based on fake military credentials. Mitchell explained that the case had become a priority for federal prosecutors because it demonstrated the intersection between stolen valor and broader financial crimes. Marcus had used his fabricated military identity to defraud the veteran community, legitimate businesses, and government agencies simultaneously. The judge assigned to this case is a Vietnam veteran, Mitchell continued. Judge Patricia Morrison served as a Navy nurse in Da Nang. She takes stolen valor cases very personally. The conversation turned to the media attention the case was generating. Military publications were covering it as an example of institutional protection for veterans' honor. Business journals were examining it as a case study in credential fraud. Legal publications were analyzing it as a precedent for aggressive stolen valor prosecution. Your case is going to change how these crimes are investigated and prosecuted, Mitchell said. Prosecutors now have a template for pursuing complex stolen valor cases that involve systematic fraud rather than just isolated incidents. After we hung up, I sat in my workshop processing the reality that my single phone call had triggered a federal case that would influence how stolen valor crimes were handled nationwide. What had started as a defense of my personal honor had become a broader statement about protecting military integrity. Sarah found me there an hour later, holding the letter from Rodriguez that had arrived with the morning mail. Spencer, brother, I've been thinking about what you said at the barbecue, about some medals representing people who didn't make it home. You're right, but you know what else they represent? They represent every soldier who did make it home because you were there. Because you did your job. Because you had their backs when everything was falling apart. That Purple Heart that Marcus held up like a joke. That medal exists because you bled for other people. Your Bronze Star exists because you risked your life to save other people. Your DSC exists because you went above and beyond what anyone could reasonably expect to protect people who depended on you. Marcus spent years pretending to be something he never was, stealing recognition he never earned. You spent years being exactly what you've always been at. Soldier who served with honor and a man who builds honest things with his hands. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like staying quiet about your service was wrong. You earned the right to live however you wanted after giving 20 years to your country. But now that your service is public, I hope you'll let us honor it properly. See you at the Pentagon ceremony, brother. It's going to be a good day. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my toolbox, next to the wedding photo and the unit picture from Afghanistan. Tomorrow, the Pentagon ceremony would officially close this chapter of our lives. But tonight, I was grateful for the brotherhood that had protected me when I had finally needed protection. Are you ready for tomorrow? Sarah asked. I'm ready to stand with my brothers again, I replied. I'm ready to let the world see what real military service looks like. Outside our workshop, the autumn evening was quiet and peaceful. Inside, we prepared for a ceremony that would honor not just my service, but the principle that military honor deserved to be protected from those who would steal it for their own gain. The handwritten letter arrived the morning before the Pentagon ceremony, delivered personally by Sarah's father. Richard Whitmore stood on our front porch, looking older than I'd ever seen him. His usual confidence replaced by something that might have been humility. "Spencer, I need to speak with you privately," he said quietly. I invited him into my workshop, the one place in our house where I felt completely comfortable having difficult conversations. He sat on the milk crate Sarah often used, looking out of place among my tools and workbenches. "I've come to apologize," he began, his voice carrying none of its usual authority. "For years of treating you like you weren't good enough for my daughter. For dismissing your choices, your character, your value to our family. But most of all, for not seeing what was right in front of me." He pulled the letter from his jacket pocket, 3 pages of careful handwriting on his personal stationery. "I wrote this last night, after spending the week reading everything I could find about your military service. Spencer, I had no idea what you'd done, what you'd sacrificed, what you'd achieved, and I'm ashamed that it took a federal investigation to make me see the man my daughter married." The letter was more comprehensive than I'd expected. Richard had researched not just my service record, but the specific operations I'd participated in, the decorations I'd earned, the classified missions that had been partially declassified during the investigation. He'd even contacted military historians to understand the significance of my Distinguished Service Cross. "The operation in Afghanistan," he continued, "the one that earned you the DSC, found out that the intelligence you gathered and the evacuation you coordinated saved not just American lives, but prevented what analysts determined would have been a major terrorist attack on civilian targets. Spencer, you're not just a decorated veteran, you're someone whose actions changed the course of events in ways most people will never know." I sat quietly, letting him process information that reframed 20 years of family interactions. "I've spent my career evaluating people's worth based on financial success, social connections, professional advancement. I looked at your choice to be a mechanic and saw a lack of ambition. I never understood that you'd already achieved more than most people could imagine. And you chose a simple life because you'd earned the right to live however you wanted." The apology was thorough and seemed genuine, but I waited for him to reach the real purpose of his visit. "Spencer, I need to ask for your forgiveness. Not just for myself, but for our family. We've been wrong about you for so long, and it took Marcus's lies being exposed to show us the truth. Richard, I appreciate the apology, but you understand that Marcus made his own choices. That what's happening to him is the result of his actions, not mine." "Yes, I understand that now, and frankly, I'm grateful you exposed him before his fraud did even more damage to legitimate veterans and honest businesses." He paused. "I also understand that my family may never recover from this. Patricia is still trying to minimize Marcus's crimes, still looking for ways to blame others. Jennifer is filing for divorce. The children are asking questions we don't know how to answer." He stood up and walked to my workbench, examining the tools I used to build honest things with my hands. "I spent 40 years building wealth through financial manipulation, leveraging other people's money to create advantages for myself and my family. I thought that made me successful, made me worthy of respect." He picked up one of my wrenches, testing its weight. "But you build things that actually work, fix problems that actually exist, help people in ways that actually matter. And you did it after serving your country with a level of distinction I never understood." The conversation was heading toward something bigger than just an apology. "Spencer, I know our family relationships may never be the same after this. Patricia and I are probably going to separate. We can't agree on how to process what Marcus did or what it means about our judgment. Jennifer has to rebuild her entire life around the truth about the man she married. The financial implications alone will take years to sort out. I'm sorry that's happening. Don't be. We created the environment where Marcus's lies could flourish, where his attacks on your character were tolerated and even encouraged. We're facing consequences that we earned through our own choices and prejudices." Richard folded the letter carefully and handed it to me. "I wanted you to have this, not because it changes anything, but because I needed to write down everything I should have seen years ago. Tomorrow at the Pentagon ceremony, when they honor your service publicly, I want you to know that at least one member of Sarah's family finally understands who you really are." After he left, I read through the letter completely. It was a thorough accounting of my military service, a detailed apology for years of dismissive treatment, and a recognition that I'd chosen integrity over advancement in ways his world didn't value but should have respected. Sarah found me in the workshop. An hour later, the letter spread on my workbench. "Dad came by." He did. He apologized for 20 years of not seeing what was in front of him. She read through the letter, her expression shifting from surprise to sadness to something that might have been hope. Do you think he means it? I think he means it now. Whether it lasts will depend on whether he's willing to live differently based on what he's learned. And Mum, he thinks your parents are going to separate. She's still trying to minimize what Marcus did, still looking for ways to avoid facing the truth about their judgment. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing the reality that her family was fracturing along lines of truth and denial. Spencer, tomorrow at the ceremony, when they honor your service in front of everyone, what do you want that to represent? Thought about the young veterans struggling with civilian careers, about the businesses that had been defrauded by Marcus's lies, about the real soldiers whose sacrifices had been diminished by stolen valor fraud. I wanted to represent the truth, that military service matters, that the people who earn recognition deserve to have it protected, and that institutions exist to defend honor when individuals attack it. And for us, for our marriage, for us, I wanted to represent what we can build when we're completely honest with each other. No more secrets, no more careful silences, no more protecting other people's feelings at the expense of truth. She picked up the unit photo from my workbench, studying the faces of young soldiers who'd served together in dangerous places. Tomorrow, you'll stand with them again. Yes, and tomorrow you'll stand with me, knowing exactly who you married instead of guessing about the parts I kept hidden. Outside our workshop, the autumn evening was peaceful and quiet. Tomorrow would bring ceremony and media attention and public recognition for service I'd kept private for 15 years. But tonight, we prepared for that moment in the honest space we'd finally built together. The choice came the morning of the Pentagon ceremony, delivered in a phone call from Patricia that forced Sarah to decide between family loyalty and supporting truth. Her mother's voice carried the entitled desperation of someone accustomed to having her way. Sarah, you cannot attend that ceremony. Do you understand what this looks like to our friends, our business associates, our social circle? Your husband destroying Marcus's life, making our family name synonymous with scandal. Sarah put the call on speaker so I could hear while she finished getting ready for the ceremony. She'd chosen a simple blue dress that complemented the formal military atmosphere we'd be entering. Mom, Spencer didn't destroy Marcus's life. Marcus destroyed his own life through years of criminal fraud. That's a very harsh way to describe family problems, Sarah. Marcus made some poor choices. But this public humiliation, this federal prosecution, it's excessive. The conversation revealed everything about Patricia's worldview. In her mind, Marcus's systematic stolen valor, fraud was family problems that should have been handled privately. The fact that he'd committed federal crimes for nearly a decade was less important than the embarrassment his exposure had caused the family. If you attend this ceremony, Patricia continued, you're choosing Spencer's vendetta over your family's welfare. You're participating in the destruction of Marcus's children's future, Jennifer's security, our family's reputation. I'm choosing truth over comfortable lies, Sarah replied firmly. And Mom, if you can't see the difference between honoring my husband's legitimate military service and participating in a vendetta, then we have nothing more to discuss. Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore, if you walk into that Pentagon ceremony with cameras rolling, if you participate in this public spectacle that celebrates your husband's destruction of our family, then you are no longer welcome in our home. The ultimatum hung in the air like a challenge. Choose Spencer or choose family. Choose truth or choose comfort. Choose integrity or choose enabling. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her processing the weight of a decision that would define the rest of our marriage. Mom, my name is Sarah Banks. It's been Sarah Banks for 12 years. And if choosing to honor my husband's military service means I'm not welcome in your home, then that tells me everything I need to know about what kind of family you're running. You're making a terrible mistake. No, Mom, the terrible mistake was letting Marcus attack Spencer's honor while we all stood by and watched. The terrible mistake was treating a decorated veteran like he wasn't good enough for our family. The terrible mistake was choosing comfortable lies over difficult truths. Sarah paused, and when she continued, her voice carried a finality I'd never heard before. I'm going to that ceremony. I'm going to stand next to my husband while the Pentagon honors his service. I'm going to be proud of the man I married and the sacrifices he made for his country. And if that means cutting ties with family members who would rather protect a criminal than honor a hero, then that's a price I'm willing to pay. Patricia's response was predictable accusations of manipulation, suggestions that I'd turn Sarah against her family, threats about financial consequences and social isolation. Sarah listened patiently before responding. Mom, Spencer never asked me to choose between him and you. You're asking me to choose between him and you. And honestly, it's not a difficult choice anymore. After she hung up, Sarah sat on our bed for several minutes, processing the reality that she'd just cut ties with her mother over the principle of supporting truth against comfortable denial. Are you okay? I asked. I'm better than okay. I'm finally clear about who I am and what I value. She stood up and straightened her dress. Spencer, for 12 years I've tried to balance between your integrity and their expectations. Today, I'm choosing integrity. The drive to the Pentagon was quiet, both of us processing the magnitude of what was about to happen. The ceremony would be public, with media coverage that would make our story a permanent part of the public record. Sarah's choice to attend meant she was publicly choosing her husband's honor over her birth family's preferences. Do you regret it? I asked, as we approached the Pentagon parking area. Regret what? Choosing to honor your service. Choosing truth over lies. Choosing to stand with someone who actually lived up to their values, instead of people who just talked about them. She reached over and took my hand. Spencer, I spent years trying to get you to be more ambitious. To leverage your military experience for better opportunities, to fit into my family's definition of success. I never understood that you'd already achieved more than any of us could imagine, and you chose a simple life because you'd earned the right to live however you wanted. We sat in the parking lot for a moment, watching other veterans and their families arriving for the ceremony. Men and women who'd served their country with distinction, who'd made sacrifices that civilians like Marcus couldn't begin to understand. Today isn't just about honoring your service, Sarah continued. It's about making a statement that military honor deserves protection, that institutions exist to defend truth, and that families should support integrity instead of enabling fraud. As we walked toward the Pentagon entrance, I thought about the choice Sarah had made. She'd grown up in wealth and privilege, surrounded by people who valued comfort over truth, who preferred convenient lies to difficult realities. Today she was choosing to stand with institutional military authority against her own family's preferences. Sarah, I need you to understand something. After today, there's no going back. Your family will always see this as the moment you chose me over them. Good, she said firmly. Because that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm choosing the man who served his country with honor over people who enabled a criminal to attack that honor. We passed through security and entered the building where my service would be publicly recognized for the first time in 15 years. Behind us, we left a family structure built on comfortable assumptions and enabling behavior. Ahead of us lay a ceremony that would honor not just my military service, but the principle that truth deserved institutional protection. Are you ready? Sarah asked as we approached the ceremony hall. I'm ready to stand with my brothers again, and I'm ready to stand with a wife who finally knows exactly who she married. Inside the Pentagon, we prepared to participate in a ceremony that would close one chapter of our lives and open another. One built on complete honesty instead of careful omissions, on institutional truth instead of family politics, on integrity instead of comfort. The Pentagon ceremony hall filled with more people than I'd expected, not just military officials and media, but veterans from across the country who'd traveled to support a brother they'd never met. As I stood in the preparation room, adjusting the tie Sarah had chosen for me, I could hear voices in the hallway that I recognized from years past. Spencer Banks, you magnificent son of a bitch. The voice belonged to Master Sergeant Williams, my former squad leader, now retired but still carrying himself with the bearing of a career soldier. 20 years of hiding your light under a bushel, and it takes some civilian fraud to get you the recognition you deserved all along. The reunion was overwhelming. Rodriguez had driven down from Fort Bragg with 3 other soldiers from our old unit. Williams had flown in from Colorado. Even Staff Sergeant Mitchell, no relation to Colonel Mitchell, had come from his home in Arizona, walking with a cane from wounds he'd taken to deployments after I'd left. Look at this gathering, Rodriguez said, gesturing toward the ceremony hall. Half the NCOs from 3rd Battalion, veterans from 4 different wars, and more flag officers than I've seen in one place since the Pentagon got that new cafeteria. The window, I could see the audience assembling. The front rows were filled with military personnel in dress uniforms. Behind them sat veterans in their best civilian clothes, many wearing unit insignia or service medals. The media section was packed with reporters from military publications, major newspapers, and television networks. But what struck me most was the section reserved for my family. Sarah sat in the front row, elegant and composed, next to Richard, who'd arrived alone. Behind them sat Jennifer with her children, who'd insisted on attending despite the complicated circumstances. Notably absent were Patricia and other family members, who'd chosen comfortable denial over difficult truth. Colonel Mitchell appeared in the preparation room, now wearing the full-dress uniform that displayed his own impressive collection of decorations. "Spencer, Major General Hawkins wants to speak with you before the ceremony begins." I followed him down a corridor lined with portraits of military leaders, feeling the weight of history in a building where so many crucial decisions had been made. Major General Hawkins waited in her office, a small woman whose bearing commanded immediate respect. "Master Sergeant Banks, please sit down. I wanted to speak with you personally before we proceed with the public ceremony." She opened a file on her desk, one I recognized as containing my complete service record, including the classified operations that had been partially declassified for this investigation. "I've had the privilege of reviewing your entire military career, including operations that remain classified. I want you to understand that what we're doing today isn't just about defending you against false accusations. It's about recognizing service that was never properly honored when it occurred." She pulled out a document I'd never seen before, recommendation for the Medal of Honor that had been submitted after Operation Silent Guardian, but classified so highly that it had never been processed. "Your commanding officer recommended you for our nation's highest military honor based on your actions during that operation." The recommendation was sealed because the mission details couldn't be made public at the time. "Today, we're finally able to acknowledge that your service exceeded even the high standards represented by your Distinguished Service Cross." The implications hit me slowly. I'd carried survivor's guilt and trauma from that mission for 15 years, never knowing that my commanding officer had considered my actions worthy of the Medal of Honor. "We can't retroactively award that medal due to classification restrictions that remain in place," she continued. "But I want you to know that your service was recognized at the highest levels, even if it couldn't be honored publicly at the time." She stood up and walked to her window, which overlooked the courtyard where the ceremony would take place. "Master Sergeant Banks, you spent 15 years building a quiet civilian life, never trading on your military record, never seeking attention or special treatment. That humility is exactly what we want, representing our institution. When Marcus Whitmore attacked your service record, he attacked every value our military holds sacred." She turned back to face me. "Today's ceremony sends multiple messages. To legitimate veterans, it says their service will be protected by institutional authority. To potential fraudsters, it says stolen valor will be prosecuted with the full force of federal law. And to the American people, it demonstrates that military honor isn't just ceremonial, it's backed by concrete consequences for those who would abuse it." As we walked back toward the ceremony hall, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 3 weeks ago, I'd been a quiet mechanic whose military service was known only to his wife and the VA. Today, I was about to be publicly honored by the highest levels of military leadership. Spencer Rodriguez called out as I entered the preparation area. "You need to see this." He handed me a tablet displaying social media feeds, where veterans across the country were sharing their own stories of civilian skepticism about their service, their own encounters with stolen valor fraud, their own experiences with family members who didn't understand military culture. "Your case has opened up a national conversation," Williams explained. "Veterans everywhere are talking about how civilian society treats military service, how fraud diminishes all of our recognition, how important it is to have institutional protection for military honor." The ceremony began with the traditional posting of colors and national anthem. As I stood with military officials facing the flag, I thought about all the young soldiers who'd served under that banner, who'd made sacrifices that civilian society often didn't understand or appreciate. Major General Hawkins stepped to the podium to address the audience. "We gathered today to honor Master Sergeant Spencer Banks, whose 20 years of distinguished military service were recently questioned by an individual who had never worn our nation's uniform." The investigation that followed revealed not only the legitimacy of Master Sergeant Banks' service, but also systematic fraud by his accuser. She paused, letting the weight of that statement settle over the audience. "This ceremony represents our institution's commitment to protecting the honor of those who serve with distinction, while ensuring that those who would steal valor face appropriate consequences." The formal presentation began with a reading of my service record that included details I'd never shared with anyone: combat operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, intelligence missions that had prevented terrorist attacks, rescue operations that had saved both American and civilian lives, classified work that had contributed to strategic victories. As each commendation was read aloud, I saw Sarah's face in the audience: surprise, pride, and understanding dawning as she finally heard the complete story of the man she'd married. Ceremony concluded with the presentation of a special Pentagon commendation, recognizing my exceptional service to the nation and exemplary conduct in civilian life that honors all who wear our nation's uniform. As I stood at attention while Major General Hawkins pinned the award to my uniform jacket, I thought about Marcus, probably sitting in a federal holding cell, and about the choice between building authentic accomplishment and stealing recognition from others. The applause was sustained and genuine, not just polite ceremony, but heartfelt recognition from people who understood the weight of military service and the importance of protecting its integrity. 6 months after the Pentagon ceremony, I sat in my workshop reading through a stack of thank you letters that had arrived throughout the week. The public attention from the stolen valor case had gradually faded, but the personal connections it had created continued to grow. The first letter was from a young Marine veteran named David Chen, who'd been struggling with civilian employers who questioned his military experience. Master Sergeant Banks, I saw your story on the news and wanted to thank you for standing up to stolen valor fraud. Your case gave me the courage to report my former supervisor, who'd been claiming Navy SEAL experience he never had, while making my life miserable for being an actual veteran. The investigation revealed he'd been defrauding the company for years. Sometimes it takes one person standing up to make it easier for others to tell the truth. The second was from a small business owner in Oregon who'd been providing military discounts based on fraudulent credentials. Sir, after reading about your case, I instituted better verification procedures for veteran discounts. In the first month, I caught 3 people using fake military IDs. Your story helped me understand that every fraudulent claim takes benefits away from legitimate veterans who earned them through service. But it was the third letter that affected me most deeply. It came from Rodriguez's daughter, now a college senior studying journalism. Mr. Banks, my dad has told me stories about Afghanistan for years, but he never mentioned that you saved his life until your case made the news. I wanted you to know that because you pulled him out of that burning vehicle, I got to grow up with a father. Because of your courage, my dad was there for my first steps, my school plays, my graduation, my first heartbreak. You gave our entire family a life we might not have had. Thank you for your service. But more than that, thank you for bringing my dad home. Sarah found me wiping my eyes as I finished reading. Good letters today, the best kind. The kind that reminds you why service matters. She sat down on the milk crate and surveyed the workshop that had become a kind of informal counseling center for local veterans. Word had spread through military networks that a decorated veteran was willing to help with everything from job applications to VA paperwork to just listening. When someone needed to talk, 3 more veterans stopped by the auto shop today, I told her. One needs help with disability claims, one is having trouble with his employer, and one just needed someone to understand why crowds make him nervous. The stolen valor case had connected me with a veteran community I'd avoided for 15 years. What I'd discovered was that my desire to serve hadn't ended with retirement. It had just found new expressions. The VA called about the counseling program, Sarah said. They want you to consider formalizing your veteran outreach work. After the Pentagon ceremony, the Department of Veterans Affairs had approached me about developing programs to help veterans transition to civilian life. My combination of military experience and successful civilian career made me an ideal mentor for soldiers struggling with similar transitions. What did you tell them? I told them you'd consider it if they'd let you do it your way. No bureaucracy, no formal procedures, just honest help for people who need it. I looked around the workshop where I'd built an honest life with my hands, where I'd found peace after years of war, where I'd discovered that service could take many forms. The pegboard held not just tools now, but business cards from veteran-owned companies, contact information for counselors who understood military trauma, and job listings from employers who actively recruited veterans. There's something else, Sarah said, pulling an envelope from her purse. This came to the house today. The letter was from Marcus, written from federal prison, where he was serving a 4-year sentence. His handwriting was smaller than I remembered, more careful. Spencer, I know I have no right to contact you, and I understand if you don't want to read this. I'm writing because my counselor says making amends is part of accepting responsibility for what I did. I stole valor from you and every veteran who actually served. I built my life on lies that diminished the value of real service and real sacrifice. I attacked your honor to protect my fraud, and I'm ashamed of every choice that led to that moment. Prison has given me time to understand what I threw away, just my career and family. But my integrity, my self-respect, my chance to build something honest. You spent 20 years serving your country and chose to build a simple, truthful life afterward. I spent 10 years stealing recognition I never earned and destroyed everything real I had. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I understand now what military service means. What veteran communities provide for each other. What I damaged through my lies. When I get out in 2 years, I'd like to make real amends, not to escape consequences, but to build something honest for the first time in my adult life. If you'd be willing to help me understand how to contribute to veteran causes instead of exploiting them, I'd be grateful for the guidance. Your service was real. Your integrity was real. Your character was real. Everything I attacked was genuine, and everything I claimed was false. I'm sorry it took federal prison for me to see clearly. Marcus Whitmore. I folded the letter carefully and set it on my workbench. What do you think? Sarah asked. I think prison gives people time to think about their choices. Whether he means it will depend on what he does when he gets out. Will you help him if he asks? I thought about the young veterans who stopped by my workshop, struggling with transitions from military to civilian life, dealing with trauma and confusion, and the challenge of building new identities after years of military service. If he's genuinely committed to making amends, to building something honest, to helping veteran communities instead of exploiting them, then yes, I'll help him. But he'll have to prove that commitment through actions, not just words. Sarah nodded and picked up one of the thank you letters from the stack. You know what strikes me about all these letters? People aren't just thanking you for your military service, they're thanking you for showing them what integrity looks like, what it means to stand up for truth, even when it's difficult. I looked out the workshop window at our quiet neighborhood, where life continued its peaceful routine. The media attention had faded. Marcus was serving his sentence. And we'd rebuilt our marriage on a foundation of complete honesty. But the most important changes were smaller, more personal. Sarah, do you remember what you said at the barbecue? About me never talking about my service. I remember. I understand now that some silences protect important things, the memory of people who didn't come home, the weight of decisions made under impossible circumstances, the private nature of sacrifice. But other silences protect the wrong things. They let lies flourish. They enable fraud. They prevent the connections that help people heal. And you've learned the difference. I've learned that sharing my story helps other veterans share theirs. That standing up to stolen valor protects every legitimate veteran. That the brotherhood I avoided for 15 years was exactly what I needed when someone attacked my service. As evening fell, I put away the letters and prepared to close the workshop. Tomorrow, I'd go back to fixing engines, solving mechanical problems, building honest things with my hands. But I'd also continue the work that had emerged from the stolen valor case, helping veterans navigate civilian life, connecting them with resources and opportunities, standing up for the integrity of military service. Spencer, Sarah said as we walked toward the house, I'm proud of you. Not just for your military service, but for the way you've handled everything that followed, for standing up to Marcus, for working with prosecutors, for accepting public recognition, for helping other veterans. I'm proud of us, I replied, for finally building something completely honest together. Inside our house, we prepared for another quiet evening in the life we'd built together, life now grounded in truth rather than careful omissions, in institutional respect rather than family politics, in the understanding that sometimes honor requires public defense. The medals Marcus had once mocked as fake now sat in a place of honor, representing not just my service, but the principle that military honor deserved protection from those who would steal it for personal gain. But more than that, they represented the truth that had finally emerged, that quiet integrity often achieves more than loud boasting, that authentic service creates bonds stronger than family politics, and that institutions exist to protect those who serve with honor against those who would exploit that service for their own benefit. As I turned off the workshop lights and locked the door, I thought about the young soldier I'd been 20 years ago, eager to serve and certain that military life would be straightforward. I thought about the veteran I'd become, choosing simplicity over recognition, privacy over publicity, honest work over leveraging past accomplishments. And I thought about the man I was now finally at peace with both parts of my identity, ready to help others navigate their own transitions. comfortable with the truth that had been forced into the light by someone who'd tried to destroy it. In the end, Marcus had done me an unexpected favor. His attack on my service had reconnected me with the military community I'd avoided, had shown me that my story could help other veterans, had demonstrated that truth had institutional power when lies threatened it. Some battles choose you, even when you'd rather avoid them. But sometimes, winning those battles opens doors you didn't know existed, creates connections you didn't know you needed, and reveals purposes you didn't know you could serve. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new veterans seeking guidance, new opportunities to serve in different ways. But tonight, in our quiet house, Sarah and I were finally living the completely honest life we'd both earned, built on truth instead of secrets, on institutional respect instead of family approval, on the understanding that integrity was worth defending no matter the cost. The story that had started with humiliation at a family barbecue had ended with honor at the Pentagon, with justice in federal court, and with purpose in helping others navigate their own struggles. Not all endings are happy, but the best endings are true. And this one, finally, was completely true.